Hello and welcome to the Hormones in Harmony podcast. I'm your host, Vivian Allred, naturopathic nutritional therapist and hormone enthusiast. If you want to learn how to rebalance your female hormones, regulate your menstrual cycle and reclaim your vitality, then you are in the right place. Each week I will be delving into different conditions such as PCOS, endometriosis, infertility, hypothyroidism, acne and hair loss. Stay tuned for interviews with expert guests, Q&As and solo episodes that are all intended to help you move from hormonal chaos to hormonal harmony. If you'd like to submit a question for me to answer on the podcast, then you can email them to hormonesinharmony@gmail.com. The information shared on this podcast is intended for educational purposes only and is not designed to replace the advice of your health practitioner. That said, let's get into today's episode. Hi, welcome back to episode number 23, and today I'm joined by Holly Grigg-Spall, and we're talking all about hormonal birth control. Holly is the author of the cult book Sweetening the Pill, on how we got hooked on hormonal birth control. She's the consulting producer on a documentary inspired by her book, directed by Abby Epstein and executive produced by Ricki Lake, which is currently in production and due for release in 2019. She also leads online workshops titled A Feminist Guide to Going Off the Pill. In this episode, we discuss Holly's personal experience with hormonal birth control, how birth control pills can negatively impact your overall health, but particularly your mental health, the mechanisms behind the pill, how they work and how they were developed, how they can actually change your attraction to a mate and your partner selection, which is really interesting, some potential long-term risks, safer alternatives, and much more. So hi Holly, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really excited to talk all about hormonal birth control, some of the potential dangers and maybe some natural alternatives for those women who maybe can't tolerate the birth control, react badly, or just want to find something natural that won't mess with their hormones or their health. So why don't you start off by telling us a bit about yourself and how you got into the world of birth control education, research, and also the book that you wrote as well.
Yeah, so really for me, it all started with my personal experience. I took the birth control pill for 10 years and I was taking about 4 or 5 different kinds over that period from when I was 17 to 26, 27. And I had some severe side effects with one particular kind of pill that led me to do my own research. And that research led me to find other women who'd had similar experiences. And from there, as a journalist at the time, although an arts and culture journalist, I pitched an article to a magazine called Easy Living about the side effects of the pill that women may not have heard of. And that research spurred me to begin a blog, which was this was 10 years ago. So that was the done thing 10 years ago. Now it would probably be that you would start a podcast. Mm-hmm. And from there, that blog attracted enough attention in terms of both media and from the women themselves who came to me to share their stories, that I was able to consider that there would be scope for it to become a book. And so I put together a book proposal and pitched that. And it became a book that was published in 2013. And in early 2014, I was invited to pitch my book to a documentary team, Ricki Lake and Abby Epstein, who'd made a great documentary called The Business of Being Born. And I pitched them the idea of using my book as a jumping off point to do a new documentary about preventing pregnancy, how women do that, what effects it has on their health, stories around that element and that stage of women's lives. And so that has been in the making now for a few years. It's due to come out quite soon. And that brings us up to date. So the only additional point to that is that I also do quite a lot of workshops now in person, and I'm developing a workshop for online as well. So I've added a little bit to kind of my otherwise, my general enthusiasm for all things related to, informed education and body literacy around birth control, really.
Yeah, that's so exciting about the documentary. It's such a great opportunity. But you're so
Hmm.
thrilled with that.
I am. I'm really pleased because I think that with a book, it in these days, I think like a book can do so much and reach so many people, but documentaries are really life-changing to people. And how many documentaries, how many times do you speak to someone now and they go, oh, I watched this great documentary and now I don't do this, or I watched this great documentary and now I do this. And it's really like become almost like religion, I feel like. People can be so amazingly converted and educated by a documentary in a way that, and with Abby and Ricki, the documentaries are really great at finding those human stories and that emotional core, and really bringing out what the themes are. And I think, I'm really looking forward to seeing it.
Absolutely. You just get enthralled, don't you? You really connect with the people, and it's different. Although books are powerful, blogs and people's experience in that fashion, I definitely agree. Video and documentary and movies are just give you that extra boost and are even more effective. So I'm so excited about that to come out, and I'll definitely be promoting that. I'm sure you will. You'll be shouting it from the rooftops when that's out.
I will. There's still so little media content around this topic too, that I think that what it can bring on in its aftermath is going to be really great as well.
And for those listening, Holly's book is Sweetening the Pill. So that's what we're talking about, and that's being converted into the documentary. Going back to your experience with birth control, what pill was it that you were on that you reacted badly to, and what were some of the symptoms and things that you dealt with?
So I was taking Yasmin, which was also known as Yaz, pretty similar. And it was taken at the time by pretty much everybody and their sister. Like it was everybody's, it was pushed really hard because I believe it was sold to doctors as like the pill that was going to have none of the side effects that the rest of the pills had. And so that also, and I just was discussing this with someone earlier today, it was very tricky because the messaging that was put out in a lot of illegal as well as legal ways by the pharmaceutical company was that it was going to be almost like a diet drug, and that you would lose weight instead of gain weight, because obviously they knew a lot of women fear gaining weight on the pill, so they thought, well, this is a great marketing message. We'll tell women that they'll lose weight on this pill, and that your skin would be, the clearest it's ever been. A lot of it was based around, some very big claims, including things like wiping out PMS and improving mood. And so when the side effects started hitting, I think it became big discussion online, and what's in terms of what there was online at the time, which was really just online forums, because Facebook groups didn't exist. And so the pushback then was very big. And for me, from the point of view of researching with a journalist background, I was really interested in how, something that had been marketed so aggressively, to the point that they had to put out retraction advertising campaigns in the US because they'd gone too far, was then having this huge downfall in terms of like civil lawsuits around the serious physical side effects, even deaths. And none of that kind of downfall was really being covered. It was being covered very minimally in media. And that really interested me because obviously I had a personal experience with it, but also it was kind of a fascinating story, really.
And I was personally on that pill too. And
really?
Yeah, it
doesn't
really
surprise me. I feel
really
like everybody
messed up my body. But yeah, initially I was put on Dianet. So I was diagnosed with PCOS and then put on Dianet, and that was just so like too much estrogen. It was so strong for my system, and it pretty much gave me depression within like a day. So I stayed on that for like a couple of weeks, and then it was my mum actually who forced me to go back to the doctor and come off. I was like, no, it'll be fine, it'll pass. But I was kind of in that mental health spiral, and I was thinking that it's going to help me. It's just kind of my body getting used to it. But then I did eventually go back because it was getting too severe. And the doctor was explaining that, yeah, it might be just too much for my system. just the amount of estrogen that's in that one. So I'd actually researched pills that are best for PCOS. I think I typed that into Google, and the Yasmin pill was the number one thing that, with all the claims, I'm sure all the drug websites were the first search terms on Google, how it was anti-androgenic, how it helped clear skin. It didn't cause the weight gain, like you mentioned. So my doctor was pretty reluctant to put me on that one, if I'm honest. And I think it was maybe more expensive for them at the time. But I was the one who actually pushed for the Yasmin, which I really regret, because, I did experience symptoms within a couple of years at first. I did experience my symptoms improving, and my skin did get clear. I didn't gain weight, and everything was pretty good for about a year. And then that's when things started to go downhill in terms of anxiety, in terms of food sensitivities starting to occur, and also really severe leg cramps, which, looking back, I'm pretty sure it was a blood clot. But at the time I just thought, oh, it may be because of exercise or electrolyte problems. I just had no connection between the pill, particularly that one. I know there's a massive lawsuits and connection between blood clots and Yasmin, but in the middle of the night, I'd just wake up crying in tears with severe pains in my legs for about 6 months. And I'm looking back, I'm so grateful that nothing actually happened, but it's just so scary to think that something could have. So that's kind of my experience with Yasmin.
Wow. Yeah. And I've heard, and I'm obviously very glad that nothing became more serious for you. But I've heard so many stories of women going, I don't know if you did this, but going to the doctor with cramps like that with Yasmin, and being told, oh, it's probably you just pulled a muscle. So I mean, I think it's, we think how oftentimes developing a blood clot can resolve itself, and you just think, that for a certain number of women they do develop to become something more serious. And also, like for me, like you said, like it was very insidious, the onset of the side effects. It certainly wasn't quick. I didn't make the connection very quickly.
Exactly. I think that's the problem. It's been so long, you don't even think it could be the pill. You start investigating other things.
And mine really started with the week when I wasn't on it. I would have really bad, like almost like flu-y feeling and PMS, and so that made me think, oh well, it's just because the week I'm off it. So that it started there, and then then that would become that. I felt like I can even remember realizing, oh okay, so it was like a week a month, and now it's 2 weeks a month, and now it's 3 weeks a month, and now it's all the time. And at the same time I was having all the things it was telling me that I should be grateful for, which was I lost a ton of weight. I was the smallest I've ever been in my life, to the point that my friends were worried about me. And I had the clearest skin. My friend said it was like a doll. Like it was so clear. It was ridiculous. It had no pores or anything. It was, and so I had that. And so to all intents and purposes, I looked what we consider to be healthy, right? In terms of how we see ourselves as women, that physically, if you look a certain way, then you must be healthy. But internally, I was not. So it was very powerful stuff. It's very difficult to get out, to make the connections you need to make, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And I don't even think I went to the doctors, because I just did not make that connection at all. I thought because my first reaction to the Dianette pill was so immediate and so obvious that it couldn't possibly be the pill this time round, because my symptoms were better, and it only started to occur a year into it as well. And would you say that there are any pills in particular that are worse? So is Yasmin one of the worst ones? And are there any good pills? Does that exist?
Well, I think that when I meet someone now, and if they say that they're on what's called a third generation oral contraceptive, which is these drospirenone containing oral contraceptives, or if they're using the Nuva ring, which is like the vaginal ring, I think there's only one on the market still, that I always do say, hey, like, even if you want to stay on hormonal birth control, don't keep using those. because they have an unnecessary elevated risk because of the progestins or the delivery method, that you don't need to be putting yourself in the way of, that you could just go on an older generation kind. And I kind of just, for me, it's a moral question, because I've just met so many of the families of women who died from these now that it's very tricky for me to walk away, especially when I don't always think that they're benefiting particularly over any other brand. It's mainly just the marketing that's got them on to that point. So those are the ones I tend to actually actively ask people to avoid.
So what other ones would that include? So Yasmin, the NuvaRing.
It's all drospirenone containing. So they're not all called, Yasmin was what the original name, but now everything, the patent is gone. So you've got anything that's got the progestin drospirenone in it is third generation, then the NuvaRing, but also the patch. But the patch I very rarely meet somebody who's using the patch at this point. The other one is Depo-Provera, is particularly terrible overall, especially in terms of coming off it. So I do think that it's really inadvisable for any woman to be on the shot, and usually those women who are on it are not given a lot of choice to have the birth control injection. It's usually just something that people are persuaded to take for whatever reason the doctor has. And then with the implant, it's always really important to be aware that implant and the hormonal IUD, although you're avoiding some side effects, it doesn't mean that you're avoiding all of the synthetic hormone related side effects. So if you're using something like that, you need to be aware that it isn't sort of the answer, because it doesn't mean that you won't have any side effects that you may have had on other hormonal birth control methods. So they all come with their own problems. There's none that I would highly recommend, although I would say, like, personally, my sister has endometriosis and has had endometriosis for some time, and has got to a point of being on a lot of painkillers, which is obviously not very good for you. And she decided to try the hormonal IUD, and so far that's worked for her, and I would supported her making that decision, and even was part of her decision making process in that. And I still, we still talk about other options and issues that she might want to look at with the Mirena. And it's called the Mirena. I don't know what they call it in the UK. But she doesn't feel that it's without side effects, but it's just a cost benefit analysis, isn't it, for every woman? So, I would never say that no woman would want to take hormonal birth control. In some circumstances, obviously, it's going to be the right choice for you. So,
yeah, exactly. And I was wondering, that are you completely anti birth control, or like you said, there's some situations? Not
at all. And I also think that we need as many options as we can available. And I also think that we still live in a world where a lot of women are suffering from relationships with reproductive coercion and abuse, and there's a lot of things going on that mean that it's not possible always to have a method that someone knows about, or have a method that doesn't stop your periods, or whatever it is that's going on. So I think it's always important. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't be working towards making sure that less women are in that situation where they don't feel they could have a choice. Obviously, I think we should be working towards a world in which all women feel they can make a choice for themselves in an informed way. But it's not always the reality. So I would never advocate as being anti-birth control, as any kind of position at all. No.
And you just pro consent, so making sure that everyone knows exactly the risks that may happen temporarily or long term. Because for me personally, I wasn't told anything like that would happen. I was probably just told the benefits in my situation, and if they did mention something, it would be just a slight increased risk of blood clots, a slight increased risk of breast cancer. You don't really hear anything else. You don't hear about the mental health aspects, or the detriment to gut health or nutrient deficiencies. You're not told about any of that. So I agree, if someone knows all of those things and they're still willing to go ahead, then that's perfectly fine.
Yes, and I think, we've come from a place of thinking that you're not, with doctors thinking that they shouldn't tell women about these things because you're putting ideas into people's heads and the placebo effect and
Right.
all this stuff. And I've
Yeah.
definitely heard that as a kind of not just an individual opinion, but as like an industry opinion, that
Yeah.
that would been carried over.
Makes sense.
And I think now that we're sort of getting to a point where, we're thinking, well, we need to listen to women's experiences. We're getting more research done into these things. And yeah, for me, it's just about, if we could start with education and information and being able to make a choice from that position, then, you're able to have more autonomy and also more control. And if you choose to use something for a short period of time or however long, then if there's side effects, how it will affect you, and what to look out for and what to be worried about. And for example, with your leg cramps, how many women know that there's a connection to blood clots and what signs are of a blood clot,
Yeah.
and when you should visit your doctor.
Yeah.
Things like that. So yeah, all about kind of informed consent, which I don't think a lot of women have. And I think even if you are in a position where you don't have a lot of choices, I still think that you should be made aware of all the side effects and potential problems, so that you can make a decision for yourself, like, is this the right choice for me, or is it better for me not to be using it?
Definitely. And before we get on to more of the potential side effects or things to look out for to know if it's working for you or not, could you just go over how the birth control pill actually works? So I don't think a lot of people actually know like the mechanisms behind what it's doing in the body. You're kind of just told that it balances your hormones or regulates your period, but what's actually going on when we're taking these pills?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of common myths around it. So I usually start with the fact that the pill isn't regulating your menstrual cycle. It's not actually doing anything except for suppressing the hormones that your body creates. So it actually replaces your cycle. So you don't have a period or a menstruation on the pill, you have a withdrawal bleed. And so you go from having a quite fluctuating hormone levels of different progestin, estrogen, different hormones throughout your cycle, to having a flatter experience of synthetic hormones that are there to stop you ovulating, essentially, which is the contraceptive method of it. And that means the bleed that you have on the break, or even the breakthrough bleed, is not menstruation, it's just withdrawal from the synthetic hormones. And so I think, a lot of women I know in the UK recently, there was news that came through that the NHS was going to, well, it wasn't the NHS, it was a different healthcare advisory organisation that was going to advise to doctors to not say that you needed to have a break to the pill. And I think that started a really interesting conversation, because a lot of women had been told by their doctors that it was necessary to have the break. But that was all wrapped up in the idea that they thought they were still having periods on the pill, and they weren't. And if we don't need to have a break, then we can come to the understanding that it's not regulating your cycle, it's replacing your cycle. You're not having a cycle. And so that was a really interesting conversation starter, I think.
Yeah, definitely. So it's not actually necessary to have the bleed. Does the endometrial lining kind of just stay plump and full for the entire time safely?
No, so it doesn't build up, because the hormones aren't there to propel it to build up, but it does to an extent. So the withdrawal bleed is the lining coming away. It's not blood from anywhere else, but it is that lining, but it only has built up a small amount. So like, for example, so when you come off, one of the issues that's being highlighted at the moment by other experts in this area is like having fertility issues due to a uterine lining not building up and having thin uterine lining, because during the course of your time on the pill, your uterine lining doesn't, and it isn't prompted by that hormonal shift. So yes, that it is coming from that, but it's not physiologically menstruation, because you can't physiologically have menstruation without ovulation.
And the pill, it was in part developed with that pattern to make women feel safe, and like it was regulating the hormones, like you said. We talk a bit about how the pill was developed. So I believe that contraception was illegal in, was it like the 60s? And instead the pill was formulated as this women's cure-all to balance the hormones and eliminate PMS. So can you talk a bit about how it was developed and kind of the myths that were shared about the pill?
Yeah, so you're right. It was originally for menstrual irregularities, is how it was presented. But yeah, the pill was developed. Originally was tested on both men and women. And it wasn't until later on in the testing that they decided to just concentrate on women. And that was not because it was impossible, as people are often told, to stop sperm with hormonal birth control for men. It's actually, you can do that, except it has a lot of side effects. And so they saw that men's testicles shrunk because of the stopping of the testosterone production, and they didn't like that. And they said, well, men aren't going to take something that has this effect. And so they just decided to move forward with women subjects, and women obviously also had side effects, and often the women that were tested on were not informed, because there was really no concept of informed consent for science subjects at the time. And so when it has a very kind of dark and checkered history of utilizing, available groups like Women in Puerto Rico, and a lot of women being seriously injured and having these side effects because of, the early pill especially was very high in synthetic estrogen, could have some very dramatic effects very quickly. And then when it came out, it was taken up pretty quickly, but the side effects were really obvious. So the first pill, Enovide, one part of the history that many women don't know about is that the women's health movement in the US, at least as we know it, was started by a group of women who were protesting Senate hearings about the side effects of the pill, where doctors were being interviewed, but not the women themselves. So it was all male doctors, not the women who'd experienced the side effects, who were interviewed about the pill after 10 years and what was happening with women and what they'd seen happening with women. And the Nelson pill hearings were why we ended up having those information packets in the pill packet, so the list of side effects
that no one reads.
No one reads, yeah, because it's so long.
Yeah.
Basically think, well, anything could be, but that's because unfortunately anything could.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's a little bit of interesting history that most women aren't aware of, is that, that there was actually early concern. There was a book called The Doctor's Case Against the Pill that came out from Barbara Seaman in the early 70s, that talked about the side effects. And for the most part, the side effects are pretty much the same. We've really changed the formulations, different progestins, lower synthetic estrogen levels, but a lot of what was investigated during that time of the Nelson pill hearings is still relevant today.
And what are some of the common side effects that people experience? And then maybe cover some of the less common, but things that can actually happen and you should be paying attention to, could be linked to the pill.
Yeah, so I think common, we always think of things like breakthrough bleeding, and that's what the pharmaceutical companies tend to focus on, is things that are most likely to prevent women from continuing to use the pill. And I think, overall, there are a lot of things that pop up for a lot of women that they don't realize are connected. That are things like having frequent UTIs, or you mentioned food intolerance issues, IBS, gut issues, low mood, It doesn't have to be extreme depression or anxiety. It can just be a general feeling of not being yourself, or lack of confidence, or low self-esteem. All of these things are also mental health side effects that we sometimes think, well, that's just how I am. Sometimes we put it under that umbrella rather than realizing it's actually been caused by the synthetic hormones in our birth control. And then I think, you're also looking at the effect that the vitamin and mineral deficiencies can have overall. So a lot of people talking these days more about thyroid problems and inflammatory issues from the pill. There's some great people doing more research into what's currently being written on now. And I have a great resource list on my website, sweeteningthepill.com, that you can really dig into. I've concentrated in recent years mostly on the mental health side effects, and there's been some big research studies in terms of diagnosis with clinical depression, which seems to be significantly higher in women on hormonal birth control, including and higher on women with progestin-only methods. Also, there was a big study about suicide risk, which seems to be connected back to hormonal birth control with women as well, especially teenagers. And so there's been a bit more research into the effect on brain development, perception, things like that. So that behavioural changes, those things have always been really interesting to me.
Definitely. And it's not just the pill, is it? Imagine all of the other impacts that can kind of interfere with our mental health, or social media. Add on top of that a bad diet and environmental toxicity, and there's no wonder why depression, anxiety, suicide rates are on the increase. So sometimes it's not just the pill, it's kind of a combination of everything, and everything happening at once and just overwhelming our body. And in terms of the nutrient deficiencies, the nutrient deficiencies alone can affect every single system in the body, because from our brain to our hormones to our immune system, it all requires nutrients. And if we're depleted from the pill, then it can therefore affect hundreds of different functions within the body. So I think that's why it has such a systemic effect and can have a knock-on effect on every single thing in the body.
Yeah, exactly. So this is really fundamental stuff. With mental health side effects, you're looking at low hormone levels, suppressing testosterone, suppressing ovulation and progestin production, B vitamin deficiency, gut changes. There's so many more connections being made between gut health and mental health. So yeah, I mean, obviously there are a lot of other reasons people are depressed or anxious, but I also would say it's kind of amazing how many times I've met a woman who's been on the pill and anxiety medication, and then gone off the pill and gone off her anxiety medication. So sometimes you find it is just that.
Yeah. Can be. And it's actually believed that the pill can act as a low-dose antibiotic in the gut, so killing off the good bacteria, and then the good bacteria influences our mental health and our immune system, obviously. So it's just so many different mechanisms that can take place. What about the influence on our partner selection, so our attraction to a mate, how the pill can actually it's been shown to influence who we're attracted to? Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, so I think we sort of don't think about the fact that we're still animals, and so we have pheromones, external hormones, and they do, play a part, or not, although not as much, obviously, because we have rationality in our mate choice.
And we have body sprays.
Yes, we do.
We cover it up.
We have consciousness and future, and ability to think about future and things like that. And so, part of it though is that we do, when women ovulate, you give off certain signs physically and through pheromones of your fertility, in the same way that we see in the animal world, just not as obviously, but it's still there. They've done a lot of studies into how men and women interact when women are fertile, not fertile, or on the pill and not on the pill. Some very famous studies. A few I referred to in the book about how men respond to women who are on the pill and not on the pill, and also how women on the pill respond to men differently or find different kinds of men attractive. And then they've also looked at relationship satisfaction on the pill, off the pill. And all of these things, quite in terms of, the wider looking at how much research is done, research quite heavily because they all intersect with men. So, and there's sort of these sexy topics that, get more attention and more media attention. So there's actually quite a lot of reading out there about this that you can do. And I think, anecdotally, a lot of women feel that they have come off hormonal birth control and then felt differently about their partner, or feel that their hormonal birth control impacted their choice of partner, somebody who they felt was not suitable or they were more incompatible with. In the end, the reasoning behind it, or the biological reasoning behind it, is just that you're meant to be attracted to someone with different gene pool. So, variation is better, so you have a healthier child.
Yeah.
So that's what it comes down to. But I think it plays out very differently in women's lives. And I think, I always say that stuff is all really interesting and often very engaging. But, often as well, it's about the fact that when a woman wants to not take hormonal birth control anymore because she has side effects, it can be that they don't get the support that they need from their partner. And so that can also have a negative effect on your relationship, right?
True. Yeah.
So there's a few other social elements at play that if you come off and you break up with your boyfriend, it doesn't necessarily mean that they had the wrong pheromone output. It could just be that they were really not very supportive and didn't put your mental health ahead of their desire to not use condoms or whatever it was. So I think that plays a part in it too. Yeah.
And I just find that whole subject so fascinating. I just love diving into the research on that and just think it's so strange, but it's just really weird to think that the pill can actually do that to our bodies. Such a tiny little pill could have such massive effects on the body. And I think it's funny that doctors don't believe that what we eat has an effect on our body or our hormones, yet they think a tiny little pill that we take once a day has such control over our body. I always think that's a strange way to think about things.
Yeah, and I mean, it's not even just in romantic relationships. There was some interesting research that came out recently about how women on the pill have a different perception of facial expressions and may have trouble reading a variety of emotions and may have a more simplified perception. So they see things more simplified from sort of, they have a smaller range to choose from. So when shown different pictures of different facial expressions, they don't have such a nuanced or subtle understanding of changes in feeling, and they just might not read people as well, and be able to pick up on social cues and dangers or concerns or things that women get quite used to picking up on. And that was very interesting. So in general, it's not just that, it's also that you're changing, we're seeing how it's changing women neurologically, but also the hormones are how we interact with the world. So when you stop your body from producing these hormones and replace it with synthetic hormones, then it's going to change your place in the world to some extent, and how you respond and react to it, as well as how it responds and reacts to you.
Wow, that's crazy. And so maybe they're not aware of danger or threat in the environment like they would be typically. Does that
that was one of the conclusions that people drew from it? Yes. So I think it's still so early days with this research that we don't know, but it is interesting because, yeah, it's about not being able to read, you know, being your sort of perception being blunted to an extent. Yeah.
And talking about all of these negative effects of the birth control pill, if someone's kind of thinking, I need to stay on the pill, or I know about the other natural alternatives, but I don't think that's right for me, is there anything that they can do to either offset or just support the body while they're taking the pill?
I'm not a big advocate of that because I don't really believe you can. I know that there's certain theory that, you know, you could take vitamin supplements, etc., change your diet and different things. Obviously, you know, you take better care of yourself, you know, your baseline health is going to have an impact. So with nutrient deficiency, if you're nutrient deficient going in, then it's going to have more of an extreme impact, right? So that does make sense, but I'm not an advocate of trying to offset it because the effect that it has means that it's actually harder to absorb any supplement or any diet change or have that integrated because of the changes in your gut and different things that it does to prevent that. So it's harder work to offset than just taking supplements, really. And also, I think, you know, the point is, at the baseline, is that the problem is suppressing ovulation, and you're not going to offset that effect because that's the action of the pill. So if you're taking supplements to sort of offset nutritional issues, etc., you're not avoiding the fact that you are still suppressing ovulation, and that's such a key root cause of a lot of issues, including the mental health issues. And there's enough research to show the health benefits of experiencing ovulation and creating your own hormones for women, that I don't think it's advisable to suggest you can sort of work around that and still suppress ovulation and still long-term avoid side effects, because you can't. Really. It just isn't, you know, we don't have those kind of bodies. You're sort of taking away, you know, I think if it was something that men experience, we wouldn't see it in such a way, because you're taking away something that's like a vital bodily function, and then, you know, that's something that's so integrated into your whole body system, your immune system, your gastrointestinal system, your endocrine system, everything, that it's very hard to be able to sort of fix that on the go, really.
Yeah, and I interviewed Dr. Laura Bryden the other week.
Oh, good.
And yeah, so I love the quote that she has. I think it's Dr. Geraldine Pryor that's in her book, and it says that ovulation is both an indicator and creator of health. And I just don't think that message is shared enough. Like, we don't even know what ovulation is, or we just think we only want to be ovulating when we're ready to get pregnant. But it kind of stores in like a bank. The more that you have, the less kind of disease risk you have in the future, and the more health you have short term and long term as well. So I think that needs to be shared more and talked about. And I definitely agree with the supplement parts, like eating a healthy diet and eating nutrients and maybe taking a multivitamin is probably going to help a little bit, but you can't just think just because you're taking a bunch of supplements you're kind of getting away with it and offsetting all of the negative effects, because you're not. You're just kind of maybe reducing them a little bit, but you're just taking something that's shutting down complete hormonal systems in your body.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, you know, when I started having the very severe side effects, it was after some 8 years on the pill. So we also have that kind of backlog of the fact that you start it when you're a teenager, when your body is still, reproductive system is still maturing. And so you have these kind of, it depends in a way, like how long have you been taking it? You know, how long are you going to take it for? What are you taking it for? If you have to take it, and, you know, because you have a health condition in which this is the best option for you at this point, then yeah, I would say take the supplements, you know. take good care of your health because you're having to make that decision, you're having to take something, then you should certainly take good care of yourself while you're doing it and be informed and aware. But if you don't have to, then the better option is, if it doesn't make you feel good, just don't take it.
And for those who maybe do want to come off the pill, or the doctor's trying to push the pill on them and they're being told that there's no other alternative, how do you deal with kind of a pushy doctor, and how do you kind of stand up for yourself and explain to them why you don't want to take it? Because I find that when you're in like the doctor's surgery, you feel like the doctor knows best and they know everything, and they're right, you're wrong. So how would you deal with a doctor who's constantly trying to push hormonal birth control pill on you?
Yeah, so I think this happens a lot, and I think, obviously you should feel like a doctor should respect you and your experience and be able to listen without interrupting or be condescending or belittle your experience in say that their knowledge, their objective knowledge overrides that, or any research they have to hand even overrides that. That's not a good situation to be in. In the UK, I know it's pretty difficult here. People always are like, well, just get a different doctor.
I know. Like, we can't do that.
They have a for-profit healthcare system, so they don't, they just, that's a service as far as they're concerned. But in the UK, that's not often the choice. So then I would suggest either I always had better experiences with family planning clinics than I did with doctors. They were always much more interested in side effects and understanding what women were going through. And the nurses that staffed them were often much more open-minded and much more like thoughtful. And I remember once having a appointment where like 5 or 6 of them came in the room at once because they all wanted to hear about my experience on Yasmin, because they'd had so many women come in saying that it was terrible for them. But also I think taking someone with you can be really helpful. People don't know that, but you can take someone in with you and they can be there with you. So if you have a friend who's a lot more confident than you at this time, or isn't feeling the side effects, and so that just feels better overall and stronger, or even your partner or somebody that you feel can advocate for you, or somebody that you feel can stand up for you or say, hey, you need, this is what she's going through. Or if you just don't feel you're in the position to do that for whatever reason, you can always take someone with you. I've written a little bit about the idea of how we need birth control contraception doulas, really. People like when you're going through pregnancy and birth who can be in the room with you, so they can help you navigate those conversations where you can often be pressured into one choice or another that you're not comfortable with, seemingly for your own good, but not always because of that. So that's always my best suggestion. It's very tricky, but you shouldn't feel like dissuaded. Try and find a community, even if it's just online. There's lots of great groups. I have one myself called Unsweetening the Pill, of women who've gone through exactly the same thing. And even just knowing it's not just you making a terrible decision can really change your attitude, knowing that this is the same conversation going on around the world in doctors' offices everywhere. And even the most confident women can sometimes feel swayed, by that experience. I think that can help too.
Definitely. You go in with all the kind of knowledge and confidence, and then you get there, you forget everything you're going to say, and you just feel like you don't know what you're talking about, the way that they interact with you. Not everyone, but a lot of the doctors, especially the older male doctors, I kind of feel like they're the ones who are a bit less open-minded, shall we say.
Yeah, and I think it depends, like if you're younger, if you're single, if you're, they've decided that you are at risk and they don't want you to be of an unwanted pregnancy, then they can be much tougher than if you're middle class and married, and so it can really be dependent on your situation too. So sometimes the best move is just to take someone with you.
Yeah. And so we can think of it in some ways they're trying to protect us, but it's not actually helping.
No, it's
A lot of the
usually coming
time.
from a lot of assumptions that they're
Yeah.
making
Yeah.
about what's best for you,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Okay.
Yeah.
And for someone who doesn't want to get pregnant, but also doesn't want to go on the birth control pill or wants to come off for whatever reason, maybe they're now aware of the side effects or are struggling with health issues because of it, what alternatives do they have?
Well, I think it's a great time, actually. When I first came off, I learned about the fertility awareness method through a kit that I was sent from Australia by Jane Bennett. And I was just reading bits and pieces online, and I was Taking Charge of Your Fertility, the book. And now, there's so many fertility awareness practitioners you can contact through Skype and Zoom and email, and work with them all over the world. And there's also this massive boom in femtech for fertility. I'm an advocate and educator for Daisy Fertility Tracker, which is part of this whole boom of technology that's helping women practice fertility awareness, in a easy, simple, kind of integrated way that's just really very much pared down and kind of trying to help avoid user error issues and common issues that can come up with doing this all yourself. And so, right now I think it's a great time to explore fertility awareness, learn more about your body, learn about your fertile signs and fertile window, and realize, like I did, that you've only got 6 days every menstrual cycle in which you can actually fall pregnant physically. Outside of that window you cannot. And that doing something like taking a pill every day, or even perhaps having an IUD inserted, seems kind of like overkill once you realize that. And perhaps that makes the analysis you do for yourself seem like, why am I putting myself through this when I don't need to? And I think even if you decide not to continue with it for pregnancy avoidance or prevention, that it's a great place to start from in making any decisions. So I highly recommend just education on fertility awareness, regardless of if you then decide perhaps to get a copper coil IUD. I still, or use barriers, or use a diaphragm, or whatever it is you choose. I still think it's a great place to start, because it gives you the opportunity of fully informed decision making, whether it's about contraception or reproductive health issue, or when you do want to get pregnant, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of the fertility awareness method, how does that differ from the rhythm method? So a lot of doctors, when you tell them that you're doing fertility awareness, they're like, oh my God, that is not effective, you're going to get pregnant. How does that differ from what they're thinking of?
Well, that's a whole other conversation, I think, for the doctor situation, because obviously they don't, and if you said you really don't want to get pregnant and then you say you're using a fertility awareness method, that can come up. But the thing is you have to remember that most doctors, when it comes to talking about avoiding pregnancy, 96% of what they learn in medical school is about hormonal birth control. So this isn't something they're aware of generally. But essentially it's different in that the rhythm method is just looking at when you got your last period and making the assumption that all of our bodies are the same and all of our cycles are the same and we ovulate around the same time. Fertility awareness is the acknowledgement that although you have this 6-day window in which you can get pregnant, which is the lifespan of the egg of 24 hours and the lifespan of sperm of 5 days, that window does move. And that's because you don't always ovulate on the same day. So ovulation can be delayed by stress or illness or lack of sleep. You're also just generally not robotic in how our bodies work, so it can fluctuate by a few days even if you're perfectly healthy and great. And that you need to do something every day to practice it. So you can't just look at when you had your period. You need to be doing something every day, whether that's taking your temperature when you wake up in the morning, or checking your cervical fluid, or checking your cervix, to inform you on a daily basis of what your fertility status is. Knowing that this is data that can fluctuate. It's not you can't make assumptions about it. So, unfortunately, there isn't a lot of that you can do when the doctor is annoyed about that, because research-wise, the pill has been around now for 60 so years, really hasn't seen any need to do the research that we needed in fertility awareness. But it is scientific fact. You can only fall pregnant during that window, and you can't outside of it. And women are often informed of this when they want to get pregnant. You will hear, well, you're not having sex at the right time, and that women are told about this if they think they're having infertility issues. It works the same way, obviously, the other way around. There's really no difference to it, except of your goal. And so, yeah, that's how it differs. It's a ongoing struggle. Again, I highly recommend finding a good online community for yourself, whether it's fertility awareness or going off the pill community, because this conversation, is something that's, you can get so much from other women. But in the end, rather than coming from a place of feeling the need to persuade anybody of your choice being right, you really need to come from a place of being like, well, in the end, it's your decision. You haven't gone to your doctor to ask them to help you to prevent pregnancy, because you're doing that for yourself. You haven't asked them to do that, so that's not their job to give you their opinion on what it is that you're doing. And it's like with going off the pill, a lot of articles will say, well, before you go off the pill, go and visit your doctor. There really isn't any need to do that unless you have a particular health issue.
To stay on.
Yeah, that's really the only action that's going on there. Unless you have a specific health issue, then it's really not necessary. Have you been on it just to regulate your periods, or very generalized things, or just for contraception? The best thing to do is just make the decision for yourself, set up your game plan. You know that you have to use condoms. Then see how you feel. The doctor's just going to tell you to keep taking it. It's very unusual that a doctor will tell you not to do that, even if, as I describe in my book, even if they themselves have had side effects from the pill. They don't really know within their purview like how to deal with that question. They'd rather just keep giving you the pill because you've come to them asking to avoid pregnancy, and that's to them, well, this is the way to avoid pregnancy.
Yeah, and post-birth control pills a whole another issue. But is there a good time to come off the pill? Can you just stop like midway through because it's not really regulating your cycle anyway?
Yeah, there's no cycle,
yeah.
So there's no like day. Every day is the same.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So people usually think, I'll just come off it when I have my withdrawal week and that's the right time, but it's not necessarily really. And I always tell people, if maybe going through a stressful period at work, or you've just had a relationship breakup and you're moving house, then maybe it's not the right time to come off, because your body's already going to be stressed anyway, and I think you're more likely to experience negative effects from coming off as well. So I personally recommend people to get the body and the hormones and the diet on track and make sure that the rest of their environment is pretty healthy and stable before they come off the pill, just so that it's not such a negative experience, because coming off can be quite a transition as well.
Oh, yeah, and I definitely agree with that. I actually waited until I was in the position where I felt very supported and comfortable, and I didn't have a lot of responsibilities or stresses on my life.
Yeah.
I waited for some 6 to 9 months before I decided, even though I knew I was having side effects. I just found that I wasn't in the position in my own life to be able to make that decision. And I'm so glad I did, because I had a very positive experience coming off.
That's really important.
Yes. And and I mean, I think if you feel there's lots of things externally that are causing stress, that you can wait it out. Obviously, like, you've got to make a decision as to whether they are really external stresses, or whether you are responding to them in a manner because you're on the pill, which I think can be the case sometimes too. Like, relationship stress can sometimes, you think, oh my god, this is terrible nightmare, but then you're like, oh, actually, it was just because my pill was causing that to be a terrible nightmare. But
Definitely.
I think if you have big life transitions, yes.
Yeah.
The best, I did it after a big life transition. I just moved to the US and got married, but I didn't have a work visa. So yeah, I couldn't earn money. So I started the blog, and I was living with family. And so I just had this kind of 6-month period of being, in adult life, being let out of the normal, responsibility and the normal schedule of things, and that gave me the opportunity.
Yeah, so if someone's just listening now and they've heard us talk about the negative effects and they're just like, I want to come off immediately, then maybe just sit down and just wait a minute and evaluate what's going on in your life before you make such a big decision, because even though it's probably better for your health in the long term, it's just making the transition a little bit easier.
Yeah, and you really do want to put in some time to just be, really easy things of like eating well, sleeping well, taking care of yourself, and if you don't think you can do that, then you're not going to have as good a time of it.
Exactly. And what's on the cards in terms of hormonal birth control? Do you think the future's going to be femtech devices and fertility awareness, or do you think that they're going to come out with new pills that are a little bit safer? And what about the male contraceptives that have been studied as well? I know that you mentioned one from like previous decades, but is there any new up and coming effective ones that males can take?
Yeah, I think that we're going to see more individualized birth control methods, in terms of like potentially, I would hope, research into why certain women have more extreme side effects on pills than others, and why some women, can be on it for 20-30 years and think that there's no issue.
Yep.
And I think you're going to see maybe use of more bioidentical hormones, although I'm really not certain they will be with less side effects. I just think that there'll be a push towards making it seem more natural, as it were. Mm-hmm. And then with male contraceptives, I think we're still in the place where there's no likelihood of anything coming around to market within the next 5-10 years. I just don't think that the methods that are currently available to men, which is really condoms and vasectomy, are taken up with enough enthusiasm. I think we're seeing a little bit more conversation around shared responsibility, especially the younger generations seem much more concerned about why women should have to take on the burden of side effects. And that, I think, could shift the conversation over time. And I think if something were made available for men, I don't think it would be available for very long. I think that the side effects would be pretty quickly established, and that even men would just not use it in the same way that women are not using the female Viagra that was brought out for women. Or there would be a backlash against it, and it would be actually be rapidly removed from the market, I think.
Yeah, and was it a male pill that was studied, and they actually stopped the study because they're experiencing low moods and fatigue and the exact same symptoms women deal with and have dealt with for decades?
Yes, and I think in the way because it would be men, and because of where we're at now, I think it could come out, but I think it would then be taken off the market. I think it could be taken up super enthusiastically, and then it won't be, or it will just become something that men don't take because they know that it has terrible side effects. And then I think in terms of femtech, I think that really all the projections show that it's going to be huge. We're seeing technology come out, not just basal body temperature related, but also cervical fluid related. There's so many opportunities there for making data tracking easier for women and quantifiable. I think that, it's fantastic because it's allowing more women to not have to be on hormonal birth control, and allowing more women to feel confident enough to make that change. With the Daisy, that's what I see all the time. Like, many women just feel like they wouldn't have been able to do it without having something like that really just simplified it down for them. I think we're going to see a lot more conversations around things like data privacy and research that can be done with data from these technologies. So I think there's going to be a lot of different shifts there as well in how we discuss women's health as well, because of the fact that there will be this increased amount of available data. So I think it's a very interesting time. When I wrote the book, that technology was very early stage stuff. There was some apps and things, but not very well known. Things haven't really changed in terms of the male birth control situation. It seems to be ongoing, but in terms of the pill, at the time, long-acting reversible methods like the coil and the implant and things like that were just sort of getting more interest, and now they're kind of taking up a much bigger part of the conversation, especially for younger women. A lot more younger women are being persuaded because they don't have to remember to take a pill every day. Yeah. So that is kind of, we know that the plan is to have things like less and less involved methods like remote control, birth control, implants, that can be turned on and off, things like that. That's the direction that, in terms of pharmaceutical companies and the industry, that's what they're looking at.
Yeah, they'll just jump on anything, try and make some weird device or new medication, to try and sell that. But yeah, I personally use the Daisy, and I love that too. So we both recommend that one. And I'll link the everything that we've mentioned, like your website and where they can get your book online too, all in the show notes as well.
Thank you.
So I want to ask you one last question and then finish up with a few more personal questions about you. So on the terms of birth control still, what's the one piece of advice you'd want women to know about the birth control pill?
I think it's important to know that, we mostly are going to hear stories of more extremes. My story is certainly more extreme in terms of mental health side effects. But it's important to realize that for many, many women, the side effects may not be that extreme, but they're still quality of life threatening, is how I describe it. So they're still affecting your quality of life, and overall you may have a more of a negative experience, less enjoyment of life overall, and there's been actually some research to point exactly to that, just as a result of the insidious ongoing effects. So that can look like having kind of just low moods, or never feeling like that thrilled or excited, or just having what they call anhedonia, which is sort of not accessing those positive mood elements, or just having very low self-esteem or kind of low level anxiety. All those things can be happening, and you may just think, this is just me, and that it's important to consider that you're not always going to be experiencing the extremes.
Yeah, that's great advice. So I want to finish up with a few questions about you. So the first one is, what's something that you're into lately? So it could be birth control related, health related, or just completely random.
Oh, I'm just going to tell you off the top of my head, and it won't be birth control related.
Yeah, that's fine.
I could give you a birth control related one as well. I'm really into the TV show Fosse Verdon, which is about Bob Fosse and his wife, and it's really fascinating because it's about how influential his wife was on his work, and how she was sort of written out of the history of his kind of choreography and shows and movies and stuff. But on a birth control level, I have a friend who has a book come out just yesterday, which is Masie Hill. She has a book come out called Period Power. And she's great. She's fantastic to follow on Instagram. Masie is Maisie Hill, and she's got she shares so much information just on her Instagram, but her book's brilliant. I am mentioned in it, full disclosure. And it's just a real, if this is like something that either you're new to, or people around you are new to, it's a great book to get to say, hey, younger sister, hey, friend at work, I'm always talking about this stuff, this is what it's about.
Yeah, like a great introduction to the
Mhm,
subject. Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah, I follow her on Instagram too, and I'll definitely have to have her on the podcast.
Yes, you
Yes,
should.
yeah,
I'm
it's
sure
a
she's
great
doing
idea.
tons of promotion now,
Yeah,
so you should get
definitely,
in contact. Yeah.
definitely will do. What's one book that has changed your life? So apart from your own, and apart from the one that you just mentioned, is there any other book that's been influential in your life?
Um, would you? Well, I have already mentioned Barbara Seaman's A Doctor's Case Against the
Ah, right,
Pill,
yeah,
but that was really like that book was when I was looking quite difficult to get hold of. I think they brought out another edition now, and I got a
okay,
really old copy. And it was the first time I'd read like a book about the issues with the pill and the side effects of the pill from a feminist perspective,
mm,
and it opened up this whole almost like an alternative timeline of the pill that really changed a lot for me, and made me realize like how much I hadn't been told.
yeah. I've never heard of that one. Definitely have to check
Hmm.
that one out.
Hmm.
Next question is, what's one thing that you do every single day to keep you in hormonal harmony? So how do you stay healthy? How do you keep your hormones balanced? Just a thing that you have to do every single day.
I think I'm really good at I work from home, but I'm really good at trying to sort of stop of an evening and just have relaxing time where I'm not plugged in, and just sort of give myself time to read or, take a bath or just chill out. And I'm pretty good at doing that. And when I first started working from home, I found it very difficult. And I think that stress was obviously, stress is really hard on your menstrual cycle and hormones. And so like I'm pretty good at building in now time for myself that isn't like doesn't have to be going to a spa and doesn't have to be like a big production. It really is just time to take space really, so that I don't have like go to bed with like thoughts racing and not
Yeah,
being able to sleep and things like that. And all that has such a knock-on effect.
absolutely.
Yeah, so really I just managing my time and managing my on and off times is really important to me.
Good. Yeah, I think I'd need to work on that a little bit too. So thanks for the reminder.
Yeah.
And last question is, where can people find you online? So where can they get your book, find more about you, and just mention your Facebook group again, but I will definitely link them in the show notes too.
Yeah, so sweeteningthepill.com is where everything is, including signing up for mailing list. So when I do this online course called A Feminist Guide to Going Off the Pill. At the moment, it's sort of sporadically available live, but it will eventually be available as recordings. I also have a resource guide on there, lots of book recommendations, and link to the Facebook group, which is called Unsweetening the Pill, which is actually the only group on Facebook that is about going off hormonal birth control in general.
Right, cool.
And also I have a really active Facebook page for Sweetening the Pill. I put a lot of articles and just things that I come across up there. I'm on Twitter under my name, Holly Grigg-Spall, as well, and I share a lot of news and stuff on there too.
Great. So, yeah, this has been such a good episode. We've covered so many different topics and everything I wanted to learn about. So, that's absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much for your time. I know that it's midday there, so I'm sure you're busy for the rest of the day. So, I want to thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. And I'm sure that you'll have a few more followers after this episode. So,
thank you.
Yeah, keep spreading the information and keep doing the work that you're doing, and I think we're all really excited for your documentary to come out soon as well.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Hormones in Harmony podcast. If you like this episode, please leave me a rating and review, as this helps to spread the word to other women dealing with hormone imbalances. As a massive thank you gift, I'll send you a free guide, 6 Steps to Hormonal Harmony. All you need to do is screenshot your rating and review, then email it to me at hormonesinharmony@gmail.com, and I'll send you the link to download this free guide. If you haven't already, check out my website vivanaturalhealth.co.uk. and Instagram page at Viva Natural Health for tons more free content and inspiration. You can also schedule a free 30-minute hormone troubleshooting call to find out the next step to take in order to overcome your symptoms naturally. See you back here next week for another episode.